financials.
Yes, that's fine. So,
So looking at page 55 of the report, and the bottom half being the RWSS development expenditure, we can see for the month that there's a small amount of expenditure compared to budget for the month, and that reflects the sort of holding pattern we're in around the consenting process. We are continuing on with the due diligence studies and expecting 80% of that to be done sort of by the end of March, early April. And the other main thing going on there is the cost in relation to the Board of Inquiry referral. And further to that, on page 56, and at the request of Council from last month, there's a copy of the HBRC Limited parent balance sheet, which shows the mainly the advances from Council to HBRC Limited and the development expenditure incurred to February 28. So happy to take any questions.
Question. Oh, Councillor Dick, then Councillor Scott.
You say that's consistent with the reforecast budget presented in item 15. A project reforecast through to February 16 has been provided in table 1. I can't see February 16 anywhere.
So the bottom half of the table, the last column is the reforecast.
Bottom part, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The High Court appeal and costs of those, the ongoing costs of the EPA process. There has been no appeal against the consents. The appeal is against the plan change, and I would have thought that might be a council expense, not an HBRC consent. I know there's a certain amount of pragmatism as to how costs can actually be capitalised there, but are you picking up on the council's behalf what would be their costs in the whole of the High Court process? The decisions against in favour of the parties who appealed and their costs, which was not a decision against council, it was a decision against the EPA decision, and where does this fairly lie?
I think the broad answer to your question at the moment, Councillor Scott, is that consistent with the treatment that we had undertaken before, where the view was taken from an audit perspective that the costs of obtaining the plan change were a necessary first step in obtaining the consents. So we have taken the bulk of those costs into the HBRC costs or expenses to subsequently be capitalised. My understanding is we're continuing to do that, but there might need to be a conversation between us and council at some point about what is actually the final and appropriate and auditable numbers of what lies in the hands of each party. But it's not going to be hugely material to the total amount of money that's been spent here.
But in terms of the principle and in terms of the High Court decision to award costs against the applicants, the Regional Council has met those costs separately.
Councillor Pipe.
Heath, can you just give a bit of clarification, just where it says basically the operating income and expenditure, you've got management services, Hawke's Bay Regional Council, and then further down in the RWSS phase 2 costs, you've got Hawke's Bay Regional Council internal staff. Can you give clarification over what's all that about and what's the division?
So the management services in the operating income and expenditure is costs related for HBRC staff running HBRC itself, nothing to do with the RWS, so just operational stuff. The HBRC internal staff is actual staff working on the RWS project itself.
Other questions? Councillor Dick.
Yeah, the additional funding to be confirmed in the project reforecast of Feb 16, does that relate to the preceding item?
That's correct.
What will be the subsequent item?
Yep. Subsequent item. Yeah.
One further question around the further geotech investigations, which has brought forward some money, which presumably also will be covered in the next item. That the results of that will form part of the assets of the company in the way of IT, intellectual information, will it not?
So they'll be capitalised into the costs, provided the project proceeds, but they would be included in whatever value there is in the combined set of information if the project didn't proceed immediately.
Councillor Barker.
With reference to geotechnical, I presume that will involve construction work, not just investigation?
The answer is it's refined. I'll be explicit here. It's not physical construction. It is exactly that. It's investigative work, which is refining the dam design in very specific terms, and also the head race design. So it feeds into, in the entire construction contract, there's a combination of geotech, detailed planning, very detailed planning, and ultimately physical construction. So it's not moving rocks from here to there in a classic construction sense.
Councillor
A
Belford.
follow-up on that, on page 51 of the report you gave is the most explicit reference to what this work would be. It's at the bottom of the page. Geotechnical work on the dam foundations, diversion tunnel, and head race.
Microphone.
Is this work that would be part of the budget for constructing the dam?
Yes, this is the same work that we spoke to you about at the last meeting, when we were speaking about bringing this work forward. So it is preliminary work that is necessary for completion of the final design. And as I explained at the last meeting, those costs were earlier included in the construction contract to be entered into after financial close. And the timing issue we have been talking about, and probably will continue to talk about, is bringing those costs forward potentially to pre-financial close. But and that would reduce the cost of the construction contract. There's no new money involved here. As I explained last meeting, it's a timing shift.
Okay. Councillor Barker.
I get that, no new money, I've got that. But it will be money, and I come to the page 46, first big paragraph that begins the outline budget. And on the fourth line, it reads, plus it may be appropriate to prepay another $2 million of the construction costs prior to financial close.
I think we're on the next item, Chairman.
Well, the two are related in a way.
Yeah. I'm just pointing out that we've slipped into the new item, and I haven't had an
and
opportunity to speak to it yet.
But I'm just seeking clarification because I asked a question, was this for construction work, and what this I've got here, because the two are related, let's not be, they overlap, and you can't hold them apart. So it says $2 million for construction costs prior to the financial close. So that's why the question is. So if you're telling me there's no construction work, that's what you said to me, it's just investigation, and then in the subsequent paper for later reading, we have it where it says clearly construction costs. I'm just wondering how you reconcile the two.
And the explanation is, as I gave just a few moments ago and at our last meeting, these are costs that were included in the design and construction contract. And we're proposing, which obviously would be incurred ordinarily after financial close. And as we said last month, we may have to bring some of those forward in front of financial close. They are not, though, costs of constructing things. They are an element of the design and construction contract.
So,
Maybe we resolve this item and move into the next one.
I'm on the same point. My issue here is that in order to protect itself for the cost, the council has set a line which is 40 million cubic metres, and we have to meet all the conditions precedent. If they're not met, the council does not spend any more money. And what it seems to me that these costs you're asking to be brought forward would, in normal circumstances, have been made after we're past financial close. So what I'm seeing here is costs which would, in other circumstances, have been after financial close, are being brought forward to be incurred prior to financial close. Now, if the council gets itself to the position where it deems that the conditions precedent have not been met, then I foresee that this could be $2 million of stranded cash that we can't get back because the project has been abandoned. That's my concern.
So perhaps we can deal with this as part of the paper that describes the requirement for additional cash.
In that spirit, I move that we accept the report as recommended on page 49 that was given, and we move to the previous agenda item.
You just have to move to accept the report.
So
Will
if
get us there.
If there be a seconder to receiving the report, then we could move on to this discussion.
Do we have a seconder for that? We have a seconder, Councillor Barker. Further discussion, or can we leave that till the next item? Put the motion, then all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. Carried, right.
And now can we proceed to this issue?
We can, but I'm actually going to ask these guys to give us any verbal addition to this you want to before we get into the question side.
Thank you, Chairman. So I'm going to speak to the document which was written by HBRC, and I imagine that council staff may wish to speak to the covering paper that goes with it. We have, as the paper says, talked with you on a number of previous occasions, including December last year and February, where we advised that due to delays of projects, we had delayed some expenditure, prudently delayed that, and we still had funds sufficient to the 30th of June this year for the expenditures that were previously anticipated. We also talked to you, to the point of the preceding set of questions, about the possibility that we might need to bring some geotechnical work in front of financial close. Those discussions are now made further complicated by the fact that we don't any longer know when financial close is going to be. We probably never did know, but we've drawn a bit of a hard line in the sand to say financial close, from our perspective now, is 4 months after the date when we have clean and no longer contestable consents in our hands. As I said before, there are a number of other actors who will determine when that date is as to when we have clean and uncontestable consents in our hands, or whether we have them at all. But assuming that at some point we do get to that, we have tested with our financial advisors and with the investors how long would it take us sensibly to get to financial close from there, and we've come to the view that that is 4 months. So that is the reason for the kind of the floating date, and that date could be sometime in the middle of the next financial year. It could even be well towards the latter half of the next financial year. The current funds that we have will not carry us forward, no matter how much of it we defer, in setting aside the possibility that we might need to spend some money on geotechnical work. Even without that, we do not have the funds to carry us through to the end of that period of time. We have set out a forecast here, which Heath can answer detailed questions about, where we think we've prudently pruned back the expenditure as much as we can. But we will have a liquidity problem at some point during the next financial year if we continue to do the tasks that you have asked us to do, because we will not have enough cash in our bank account to fund all of those activities. What we propose here is that we borrow up to a very small fraction of our balance sheet, so that we're in a position to meet those liabilities which are currently projected as and when they fall due, which is the test for a going concern. It's probably best if I leave it at that point and address councillors' questions. Sorry, there's one more thing I should say, Chairman. I would have had other colleagues here because it's obviously a significant decision, but all three of the local independent directors are all at other board meetings today. So that's why they're not here.
Busy people. Just before we get into this other discussion, I just had a question for Heath. Looking at reductions here, and I think the term's called cutting your cloth to suit. Is there potential, depending on the length and breadth of any level of inaction due to consent discussion not being complete? I mean, are you able to take any more out of this, I suppose, is my question.
No, this has been trimmed back in terms of timing of work as much as possible. In terms of, if you look at, so I'm on page 47.
Yes.
And we cut down in sort of July, August, September, down to $88,000 a month. That's pretty much the bare minimum during that period of actually how much work we can do.
Yeah, Heath, I'd note in that $88,000, there's $30,000 of assumed legal
Yeah,
expense.
so 58,000 of costs.
Legal expenses?
Around a potential High Court appeal.
Oh, okay, so some of that is related to the delay?
Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Dick.
Has any calculation been done that should this motion be passed and you borrow $4 million as to what the council is going to have to find from whatever source to replace a reduced dividend flow?
We've gone through a process of determining how much, at what rate we can borrow the money. On the basis that we're borrowing at the back end, probably on this forecast December to February. It's not going to be a huge amount. It could be in the region of $120,000.
So maybe I'll then direct the question to Paul. Where do we find that gap in income from?
Our councils, I mean, most of this borrowing, in my reading of this paper, appears to be for geotech and other consultancy work. That's the majority of it, and you'd agree with that. So that is basically part of the capital project, which was always part of the capital project, but it's going to be done a little bit earlier, and there's good reasons for that. So therefore, the cost of funding that would be part of capital. So if the figure's 120, then that would be basically just an increase in the capital cost of this project, which so the increase in the capital is infinitesimal, but the impact on our bottom line, as you correctly point out, Councillor, is becomes an issue. So it's easier to put it against capital. The funding should go against capital, but I think he's comfortable with that.
This way, fellas, relax. Councillor Barker.
Supplementary question to Councillor Dix. That's on your answer presumes that the project goes ahead. If the conditions precedent are not met and the project does not go ahead, what is the net cost to the council and how is it going to be funded?
Councillor, all the money that has been put over to the Rotanifera is assumed is going to go ahead because it's all capitalised, and if it doesn't go ahead, then there's a treatment to be looked at. So what we're talking about is another increment on that. It's not new.
Chairman, if I can return to Councillor Dick's question, the impact on my view would be that the impact on the council's budget of us borrowing these funds would be significantly lessened if we borrowed from the council and paid interest, because we are talking about borrowing potentially from the council or from other parties, and the paper is deliberately written broadly so that at some point in the future, when we have our consents, or assuming we get them, we may be in a position to draw down early some of the Crown Irrigation investment money, which would be at a much lower interest cost. And so it would be prudent to take that opportunity if and when it arose. But if the interest was being returned to council, then the impact on council's own finances is modest, I would have thought.
I'm getting up there. Councillor Scott.
I just wanted to pick up on the who's and wherefores, and trying to read behind the lines and listen to, between the lines and listen to what you've just said. There is any current potential to borrow from Crown Irrigation, but that could change once the consent, the EPA process has proceeded to a further stage?
So as between these papers, says currently, because we have explored both avenues, the project at its present stage doesn't meet the criteria for either the Irrigation Acceleration Fund or Crown Irrigation Investments Limited. Both elements of the Crown are aware that there is an issue about whether or not their definitions create a gap between them, and it would appear that there may be a gap between them. But policy work is going on to change or to investigate whether the criteria for CIIL can be changed. That obviously will take some period of time. That in itself might change the situation for ourselves in relation to them, even if we haven't got a consent in our hands. If we have got a consent in our hands, then we're in a significantly different position relative to their current criteria than we are now. And both of those things might, in combination, change their ability to finance us. We want to leave that option open, which is why the paper is written the way it is.
Chairman, I don't want to delay the questioning process, but can I advise that I'd like to foreshadow a motion?
Yes, Councillor Belford.
But I do have a question.
That would be better.
To this point, I mean, it seemed like
At the moment, the primary one is that we don't have a consent.
Clean consent.
A clean and uncontested set of consents. That's the primary one, but it's not the only thing.
and there are others you can't discuss in public session.
No, because they haven't determined their.
No, I'm not in a position to discuss them because we have had confidential discussions with them, but the principal thing that they have told us is that because we don't have a consent in our hands, we are not investment ready. But that is not the only criterion.
To follow along this Councillor Dick's stream of thought here, if the conditions aren't met and the project is terminated, there's a party who's eligible for a sizable payment. Is that factored into this budget at this point?
Yes, there's more than one party who are eligible for end of development project payments, and both of those, well, not both of them have to be paid. If one gets paid, the other doesn't have to be paid.
I understand that, but the money would need to.
But the money is in the budget.
It's in this existing budget somewhere?
Yes, it is.
Councillor Barker.
My question is to Paul. If this resolution is passed and we spend $2 million essentially for maintaining HBRC's capability and $2 million for geotechnical work, and if the conditions precedent are not met, where does the $2 million, the cost of the $2 million for the geotechnical work fall? Will it be less capital for HBRC, and will there be a loss of income from that expended capital? In other words, if it's not proceeded with, it'll be stranded capital for which we'll never get a return on.
Yes, Councillor, if the return of it isn't proceeded with, then the full amount that this council has put forward by way of advances, which may or may not include the $2 million for the geotech, would have to be, or a portion would be written off. There'll be some tax advantages, but most of it will be written off, or a large portion will be written off, and that will, of course, impact on council's revenue stream. The long-term plan assumed that the project will proceed, and the long-term plan assumed that there will be a return on it, on those funds, as we had a discussion earlier in the day. Now, we also had a discussion earlier in the day that the return wasn't in the short to medium term coming from the Ruataniwha. It was coming from Council's other large investment, which is the port. The monies that the port is putting over to HBRC will still be available. And this council, I would believe, would make a call on that. Not to do so would impact on their bottom line.
Follow-up question. If we are seeing that $2 million for the geotechnical work is at risk because if the dam does not proceed, we cannot get it back. So in other words, stranded capital. How can the recommendation in here on 6 say that this makes sound commercial sense? Because there must be an element of risk analysis being done in here, and where capital is likely to be stranded, I'm concerned to see that we're trying to say that it makes sound commercial sense.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'll answer that one. In actual fact, the context of that particular sentence, Councillor Barker, was around making provision for HBRC as a legal entity to be able to borrow funds. And in terms of that, it generally, I think, would be accepted that there's sound commercial sense for a going concern to be able to leverage against its, in this case, quite substantial equity. So the context of that statement was around a borrowing facility. It was not a comment or commentary on any particular use of those funds.
Sorry, excuse me. Any other questions? Councillor Dick, you wish to?
Chairman, before you proceed, may I make a final comment?
Absolutely.
I just think the councillors should be aware that while it is entirely within your prerogative to determine the resolutions that are made here or a changed set of resolutions, you will place, if some form of borrowing facility is not made available, you will place the directors of HBRC in a very difficult position in terms of the liquidity of the company at some point. And that would be, I think, unhelpful both for the directors, for HBRC itself, and potentially for the council. And I think you should, it's my duty to advise you of that.
Chairman, I just have a question on that, but isn't it true that you've said your liquidity's fine till 3rd of June? Cash flow?
Until the 30th of June, yes. But prudently makes projections beyond then because we have well-known financial liabilities beyond the 30th of June, for which we will not otherwise have cash to pay.
Could I just
Thank you.
one quick follow-up? Say to Chairman of HBRC, it would have been very helpful if that was the case, that statement was made at the beginning of these discussions, not as a tail-end comment.
It was a summation. Anyway, let's go to Councillor Dick.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to propose a motion, and I hope I'll get a seconder so I can at least explain it. And the motion would be item 1 as it stands, item 2 as it stands, item 3 reading, notes that if the proposed borrowing is approved by Council, HBRC will progressively seek approval of Council on the drawdown of debt finance and the purpose for which the funds are intended to be used.
Seconder for that? It was close.
Could you just repeat some of the wording again, please?
Notes that if the proposed borrowing is approved by Council, that's as it is, HBRC Limited will progressively seek approval of Council. That's what's intended. On the drawdown of debt finance and the purpose for which the funds are intended to be used.